Hello, everybody. Welcome to the runZero Hour. We're going to get started in just a minute.
Hi.
More people keep coming. Keep them coming.
It's a party.
It's a party. It's a deluge. So, while we're waiting, as promised, I am wearing. Even for me, it's actually a particularly nerdy T-shirt. So I'm going to sit up here a little bit. This is if anybody knows what this is, I mean, I'll just be impressed, right? But it's actually even for me pretty historical. So more
I love
people
that.
coming. Welcome, welcome.
Rob, did you ever go through a cellular automata phase?
I'm in my cellular automata phase.
Oh, good.
So yeah, I'm still
I,
in my cellular automata phase.
yeah, same. I've been in mine since high school, and it's gotten to the point where now when I play board games, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so this piece's next neighbor has the XYZ, and I go, okay, are we using more neighborhoods or von Neumann neighborhoods? And they never really know what I mean.
I love it. I love it. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to episode 7 of the runZero Hour. And this is a very special episode. I am really excited about this one. They're all great. They're all great. But I'm really excited about this one because we have coming up our very first special guest, Brianna Cluck. Everybody say hi to Brianna. Hi, Brianna. And she's going to be talking about honeypots, interesting traffic, and the X Files. And I remember actually when my first kid was born, I sat when I was up with him at night. I would sit and we would just watch the X Files and just marathon it. So I've got very fond memories of that. Although I think it's a different kind of X Files that Brianna's going to be talking about today. And then HD is going to talk all about mystery traffic, mirrored playback, and Tom is going to talk about encrypted database connections. And then, as always, we will have our rapid response roundup. So, to get started, I would love to introduce our special guest, Brianna Cluck, Security Research and Detection Engineering at GreyNoise Labs. So, Brianna, take it away.
Hello. All right. Thank you so much for having me. It's really cool to be your first guest on this show, so I will do my best. Yeah, so as the slide says, I work in security research and detection engineering at GreyNoise. I'm part of GreyNoise Labs, which is our research arm of the company. And first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what GreyNoise does. This isn't a sales pitch, just a general overview. And then I'm going to go over some of the interesting things that we've found and done. Next slide, please. Okay, so first, let's talk about what GreyNoise does. And if you want to go to the next slide there. So we do a lot of things, but to simplify it, we have two major things. So we have honeypots and we have tagging based on those honeypots. So for honeypots, we have a large number of servers that are spoofing various devices. We have some Palo Alto ones, we have some Apache OFBiz, we have some F5 big IP ones, things like that. And we have these deployed all over the world. We have them on both public networks and on the edge of networks for our various customers so that we can kind of give tailored intel for them. And basically what they do is they give just enough of a good response that whoever is scanning the internet or trying to blast exploit attempts across the internet will see something coming back and they will be very satisfied and then they won't get any further. And while they're being sadly dissatisfied by that, it's saving all of the logs and all of the PCAPs in a database that we have control of. And then what I do is I take the logs from those honeypots, myself and all of my coworkers, and we do the second part of the company that I'm talking about today. That's tagging. So we look through those logs, and we have kind of two ways that we go about this. Well, really three when you think about it. First is if we have like a vendor or like CISA releases a new known exploited vulnerabilities report, then we will look for evidence of that new vulnerability or that vulnerability that's being mentioned by CISA in our logs. And if we see it and we don't already have a label for it, then we will make what we call a tag. where it will take any of that traffic that matches the vulnerability and it will show it on like your SIM. So if you have a SOC analyst and they are looking at some strange traffic, they can say, oh, okay, this is log4j. Or if it's like one that I've been working on for a little bit is a web crawler that ByteDance uses for their news service. And so they can say, oh, this is a whole bunch of traffic from China, but it's ByteDance basically making the Reddit thing work. And then you don't have to worry about it, or you do have to worry about it depending on your threat model. And then on top of that, we also will do research into the logs ourselves and look for new, interesting, or not very well documented exploits, whether that is with a new machine learning tool that we have that kind of takes clusters of similar payloads and puts them on an interface for us, or sometimes I will just do a lucky dip into the logs and kind of see what comes out. Okay, so next slide, please. So here's just some of the mysteries that we've solved already. So for one thing, there was a new Fortinet vulnerability in FortiOS over version 7.0.0. And a lot of people have already decrypted FortiOS. This is maybe rude to say, but it feels a little bit like a rite of passage to decrypt Fortinet devices. And we noticed that the specific architecture we were using and the specific version we were using had not yet been decrypted, or at least not in any way that was available on the internet. So some of my coworkers who are much smarter than I am decrypted it, and then we ran a patch diff between the two versions between before and after the security update so we could find what the vulnerability was and what it was exploiting. And that way we're able to make a tag before public proof of concept code had been released. GreyNoise, this was a little bit before I joined GreyNoise, actually made a large list of indicators of compromise for log4j being exploited in the wild. That was actually my first major experience with GreyNoise, was talking to them during that incident. And well, I work here now, so I guess that conversation went pretty well. Also last year, this is my personal favorite solved mystery. We ran a CTF at DEF CON. And as part of the CTF, we had some bonus questions. And I said, what if we asked people to bring us the PCAP files that the MyPillow guy claimed he had, that he claimed were like evidence of election fraud? Because it seemed kind of impossible. It seemed kind of like he was just blowing smoke. Well, we had someone send us an email and go, hey, I'm friends with this New York Times writer who has the actual files, and he sent them to me. Here you go. And it was wonderful. And I absolutely lost my mind. I didn't think we would get anything like that. We also got a few responses being like, this isn't a thing that we can send you, or people sending like debunking articles, which is really cool. But this one was the one that we gave the points for because we actually got the files. And I looked through the files myself because I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am very nosy. And what I did find, well, what I didn't find was any evidence of like hackers messing with, the proprietary architecture that the voting machines use. What I did find was that they had several meeting rooms and routers called Zootopia, which is proof that furries run the government. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now that we've gone over the solved mysteries, I'm just going to go over some of the things that are strange. And with this, I'm going to slow down how I talk a little bit. I'm going to go over each thing, and then I would like each of us to kind of talk about it and maybe give our thoughts. And if you are in the chat and you see one of the payloads and you know what it is, and you're like smashing your fist against the keyboard because you want to tell us, please put it in the chat. I would love to know. Okay, next slide, please. So this first one came up a couple weeks ago. I always like the ones that are the OAST payloads because they're always really strange. This one is particularly strange. I've manually redacted some parts of it just to preserve whatever amount of sanity you might have if you try to, go to these URLs or use these Azure tenant IDs. So what I'm seeing is they're doing a post request to Sweet Auth, and then they're trying to use JNDI injection in the wrong field of the request. And then they're just randomly making a username, which is a long random email address, possibly base64. I didn't look that hard into the base64 part. And then both the password and the tenant name were the same value, which is very strange to me. I've not quite seen anything like this. My best guess is that it was someone doing vulnerability scanning and they were just trying to see how many hits they could get at the same time. What are y'all's thoughts?
Hmm. My first thought is I love the font. So,
That is, oh gosh, I don't even remember which font I use, but that's just a screenshot from running micro on my terminal.
mhm.
Ron suggests that it's a Cisco endpoint used
A
by.
Cisco, that would make sense. That was when there were some Cisco things in the news. I'll have to actually look
Mhm.
into that and see what we can see from that. Because if that turns out to be something that we can tag from that, I'm going to have to give huge props.
What other requests did the same IP make? Would that help you figure out what they're going for?
So the same AP sent the same payload a couple of times. I didn't see a whole lot of information from the same one, but I can look back in historical data, and that might actually help a lot.
And how many of these kinds of requests did you see? Was this kind of a one-off?
So this specific one, we got like two payloads that matched it, but then in terms of very similar payloads, I see a minimum of at least like five a week, which
Mhm.
isn't a lot, but since that's just the five that's being caught by one of our systems that looks for like very anomalous logs,
Mhm.
it's not nothing. I notice a lot of the time these very strange ones are ones that are related in some way to OAST. It makes you want to send some of the logs to like Portswigger and see what they think. Um, yeah, so that's it's strange because it's a little bit common, but it's not so common that I could be like, oh, another one of these. But it's also not so unique that I could immediately chalk it up to like a cat stepping on a hacker's keyboard, right?
There is
Yeah.
a bit of a cat-like quality to it, though. I agree.
For sure, for sure. It feels like either a cat or they ran like a random field generator, like a password generator or something for everything. It's
Mhm.
very strange. We can move on to the next slide if you would like.
All
I
right.
think Ron nailed this one. It's posted in the QA.
Let me see.
Yeah, it's in the
Ron.
answer section there. It looks like a Cisco bug for a log4j vulnerability in that Cisco product that he mentioned earlier.
Oh my
Excellent.
gosh.
CSS suite admin.
See, that's why I say my coworkers are so much smarter than me.
Yeah, Ron's great.
I love Ron. Okay, let's go to the next slide then. So this one is interesting. This is a screenshot from my pager that was accessing one of our databases that has some of these logs. And what this is a Modbus connection attempt. And the
Mhm.
strange thing about Modbus, if you're in the audience, you're not 100% sure what that is, it's the kind of security by obscurity uh, protocol used for like programmable logic controllers. So this is the sort of thing where you would send Modbus traffic like within a factory if you
Mhm.
needed to adjust how like a factory arm is operating. This isn't something you should be seeing across the internet if you are practicing good security hygiene, but it's also definitely something that you wouldn't expect to see someone opportunistically scanning the internet with. This is just a very limited screenshot, but we get tons of requests like these, and it's not just in one
Mhm.
place. I've seen them in Eastern Europe, in the US, over in our sensors in Asia, all over the place. My best guess is that it's someone doing a real shot in the dark, trying to
Mhm.
find like a factory that didn't, like maybe they port forwarded a PLC or something. What are your thoughts?
Well, So as we talked in our the runZero research report, which you can download on the website, but we have noticed that there, as OT technology, OT and IT have converged, this is becoming easier to have happen, right? There's a lot more OT devices than should be on the internet, on the
Mm-hmm.
internet. And we even went back and kind of did some retrospectives, and it's holding steady. The number of devices on the reachable on the public internet seems to be holding steady. It's going down in the United States, but it's going up in the rest of the world, which I thought was really interesting. And we've seen a lot of Modbus, a lot of other OT protocols like S7 and Ethernet IP are
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly common in that they should be zero, and there's a non-zero number.
Yeah.
Um,
Amazing.
and
Now that makes me wonder, do you think this is like a misconfigured VPN? Like maybe the people controlling
mhm.
the PLCs have been trying to remote in, or what do you think could be causing this rise?
So I think a large part of it is, yeah, they're just connecting to the internet for the sake of expediency, a lot of the time. And HD or Tom, do you remember off the top of your head what was the percentage that we found in our data set that were connected to the public internet?
It was a 7%. One of the drivers
7%.
for it, yeah. So one of the recent drivers for it is a lot of the power device, like your ABC, UPSs, your Schneider Electric stuff, your Sentry CDUs. They often offer a Modbus service by default out of the box. So even though they're not really
Mhm.
hooked up to like a coil register or things like that, they do offer Modbus as a default service on those PDUs at least.
Yep.
Oh, so we could be looking at default configs for
Mhm.
like somebody's UPS where they're not really using the Modbus and they just never think to turn it off.
Yeah, but it's actually really helpful to scan those devices through Modbus because you can use it to better fingerprint the device.
Mhm.
I'll
Yep.
remember that.
One of my favorite things that I've worked on is the Modbus probe in runZero, and we do a lot of fun stuff with that. We can get some really interesting information. Sometimes we don't get any useful information, from Modbus specifically, but sometimes we just get everything we need. It's fantastic, and I love it.
I
And
would
Modbus is one of my favorite protocols that I've worked on. Just over the past, I've been messing with Modbus for 20 years now, and it has gotten a lot better. It's gotten a lot better.
I love that. I would actually love to pick your brain about ICS security at some point, because that is a bottomless rabbit hole that I would love to dive down.
Well,
Yep.
Tom and HD can tell you I can't talk about that for hours and bore you to death. I'll just, yeah. So,
I
Yeah.
love it.
I would like my knee jerk on that would be to go check the probes for our product and for MAP and other scanners just to see if this isn't one of the canned um, probes that folks might be using that are now doing
mhm.
sweeps across the net. There are
Oh.
as you know, I it wouldn't. There are quite a few folks who would do such a thing, and I'd be surprised if at some point these IPs don't get tagged with benign scanner or something similar, unless it's just a
Mhm.
rando using Nmap.
That's a really good point. I might have to send you some more context on this and we can see if maybe it's from your IP pools.
This is HD, I bet, is what it is. No, I'm kidding. But
I knew
We
it.
don't use IV pools. We use other people's IV pools. So
It's HD operating in an internet cafe in Belarus.
yep, yep.
All right, well, we can go to the next slide then. So this one's really interesting to me. So I put that this one smells like something because this to me does not seem random.
Mhm.
We actually talked just a little bit before the show opened on what this might be, but I'll go over what my first initial investigations into this were, and then we can maybe talk more generally about this. So my first thought when I see, so the way that our sensors look at things is they generally try to decode from hex into ASCII or UTF-8, actually, sorry, my bad. And so when I saw that, I thought, well, this is just inappropriately translated hex code. And so I went through and I took the original, just all the hex data for the packet, and I put it in CyberChef. And I thought, I'm going to get a good feel for what's really going on.
Mhm.
And it has like a fairly low entropy number, which would imply that it's something structured. I was unable to figure out what it was. My first thoughts are either that it's some kind of binary that was being sent and then the connection resets. Or my other thought, because there's that area that sort of says passway KS, was my thought was maybe it was like corrupted data or corrupted encrypted data where they were trying to enter like a password field in the cookie. But we before this meeting started, was it you, Rob, or HD that said that looked like a PHP object?
I think it was Tom.
Yeah, I said I thought it looked like some kind of serialized object, and given the post path, it might be to some PHP based forum like WordPress or whatever. I took a quick look at the PHP object serialization because I'm not familiar with it, and it doesn't look like how they serialize their objects. But again, that's coming from a position of ignorance. The pattern there of KS, the rights reserved sign, MK $ showing up twice in the same pattern makes my brain twitch, makes it think it's some kind of structure, as you mentioned before.
It's
some
got
kind
a
of encoding.
smell.
It's got a
It's
smell.
definitely got like an odor, an ode hacker.
Yeah. Yeah, so it does feel like some kind of serialized object that's there, but I'm not familiar enough with the different forms to know what kind there.
Yeah.
I think Ron at some point mentioned that it may be an indicator of some kind of zlib compression, but I haven't looked at haven't looked up those values yet. But it definitely looks like some kind of payload.
I tried running some inflate functions in CyberChef. This is, I guess, a confession on my part. I run everything I don't recognize through CyberChef, and then I play with it until CyberChef gives me the goods. That's the real research, my friends. Google and CyberChef. But yeah, I couldn't get it to inflate to anything, but that doesn't mean that it's not something. I might just have to look at the hex code and look for any magic bits in there.
Yeah, I will say that I saw a variation on a public website where someone had listed the various payloads that come in. I saw a variation of this payload that was /email/category/yud.
Interesting.
They didn't show the payload itself; they just showed the URL, and so it looks like there may be some application that has some path variation or takes that suffix. And does something with it. And I don't know if YUD is something that's specific to them, or it's just a random generation, random pattern of characters that they've put on there just to toss at the target.
That is a good question. And that also brings to mind one of my absolute favorite gems of the internet. There is something about blogs, usually in Japan or mainland China, where they love making posts where they just show like, hey, here's all the things sent to my server. I don't 100% understand their impetus for posting it, but I love it for my work because then even if I don't know what the thing is, I can say, but it's something because other people are seeing this. Yeah, this one, it's vexed me. I keep coming back to this one like probably too often. It's starting to get into pins and red string territory for me. I will solve this one. This is my Eugene Toombs. It comes out every 7 years, and it eats little bits of my brain until I figure it out. I'm an X-Files fan, in case you hadn't noticed.
Yes. I was good. That's a deep cut right there.
He's one of my favorite recurring characters.
I was going to go with it's your white whale Moby Dick thing, but yep, okay.
All right, well, I think we're about done with that slide if you want to move to the next one.
Sure.
This is one that is new. This one came in about a day before we started preparing for this. And this one, I might be able to actually figure it out. I just haven't had a whole lot of time to research it yet. So it looks to me like they're running path to reversal through CGI-bin, trying to read Etsy password. But then the interesting thing, and I added a bunch of new lines to this just because the request was so long, but in the echo context type, they try all kinds of ways of trying to do remote code execution. And my favorite is the repeated use, renaming, and trying to cover footprints of ohshit.sh. I would love to see ohshit.sh, and I would love to see how it works and what it's doing. I've removed the IP address because it's probably somebody's like personal DigitalOcean bucket. And as much as they are being a naughty little person right here, I'm not gonna dox them like that. Have you all seen this sort of thing before?
What's weird though is
Yep.
like if you're doing a post to a file that's not executable, it won't run it. Like CG
Right.
names executable content. And if you run etc password, even with the bash script, it's going to error like what are all these random lines?
Right, like you would think they would do like a get request, or they would do post to like, bin dash sh or bin slash sh or something like that. Instead, they're trying to run password, and then to me, it looks like they found a tutorial and then they posted it all into like Postman and then forgot where everything's supposed to go.
Yeah, the content type for form URL encoding doesn't match the actual content type. There's no
Right.
parameters, x equal y. I think they're just dumb. I think this is just someone showing shade at Go. They're saying, I know how to write Go, but I don't know how anything else in the world works.
Yeah, this payload looks a lot like payloads I've seen in a former life. The construction of downloading the file and then trying 16 different ways to execute it and then trying a different way to download it. I used to see things where they'd see curl and wget, and this one's got a different, and it's got a FTP get. So that part looks pretty standard for me. I've seen that a ton in the past. As y'all mentioned, the whole post to CGI bin past, the path traversal past WD, that's weird as all get out. The form URL encoded, as HD mentioned, is a bit odd, and it makes me wonder if there wasn't some processing bug someplace where it ignored certain things. But it does look like they've taken 2 or 3 exploits and munged them into the same thing. It's like, maybe one of these will land. I'm going to send one request and one of these might land, and if it does, great.
Exactly.
It wouldn't
Hardware
surprise me
call.
seeing that payload if it's not a variant, one of the Mirai variants that's been tweaked as well, because that payload format is common, but it's also I used to see it a lot with Mirai.
Okay.
Not
That
this one
makes
specifically, but like that format of like try 6 different ways to get the file, try 4 or 5 different ways to
Yeah.
execute the file, and then clean the file off disk.
It reminds me a little bit of have you ever been on Hack the Box on one of the public boxes, and when it's very popular, and then you keep getting like smacked down by Kerberos because somebody's sitting in the temp file just like spamming every single PowerShell command they know? It reminds me a lot of that. A very specific cut. I'm only a little bit salty. It's only been 3 years. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look and see if this has similar IPs to what we've been seeing running Mirai, because we do have some amount of Mirai tracking. I'll have to see if this is a variant on that, or if this is just like a script kiddie doing their best. It definitely looks kind of automated. It looks like they're we're going to try everything just in case they're running BusyBox, or just in case they only have FTP instead of like SCP, things like that. Super sketch.
Get the payload. I love it.
Yeah, you gotta payload it. All right, well, next slide then. It's over.
It's over.
That's the end of my part of the presentation. Thank you for helping me with some of those. Looks like we've solved some mysteries today, gang.
See, now I got to lose my glasses like Velma if we're going to do a Scooby-Doo reference. But
I love
no,
it.
that was fascinating. Thank you so much, Brianna, for that. That was a lot of fun. So, and everyone, please keep asking questions. We'll keep answering them.
Yes, please. And thanks so much for letting me show some of these off. So internally, I have a label that I will put on these payloads, and I just call it X files, because I know that someday I'm going to be able to figure it out, and today is not that day.
I want to believe.
Exactly.
Yeah, so future retrospective hunt's going to find the solution and then go back and tag them correctly.
Exactly. They will no longer be an X file.
Speaking of mystery signals, possibly from space, HD has some cool stuff that he'd like to talk about.
we look at honeypot traffic, but for a very different reason, right? Like we're not looking for people attacking stuff to figure out who's exploiting what. We look at it to find like cool techniques we can steal from attackers and use for discovery within like runZero to help people identify their products better. So we see traffic going to a port that we don't understand. We really try to understand it, try to figure out like, can we use it? And that's helped us do things like deliver like PS4, PS5 discovery protocols, all kinds of like oddball weird stuff that you see flying around the internet, but you don't actually see documented anywhere else. So we've run a really small honey net, but it's been a great source of just picking out all the weird crap flying across the wire. So how do you go about doing this like really, really fast? So one fun thing is like I just overnight last night, I just captured a bunch of random traffic UDP port 443 from our honey net. And there's some standard stuff there. There was a bunch of really oddball stuff. And we'll kind of talk about the process that we use for it. So the very first thing, of course, is I opened up in Wireshark and hope they didn't have a remote executable for Wireshark or bug for Wireshark like everyone else has had. There's a reason that Wireshark always prompts you to update because there's always a remote execution bug in it because there's so many different C language decoders. But the funniest part about that is I had a little snitch installed. The very first thing that Wireshark did when I opened up my UDP 443 PCAP was connect to UDP port 443 to get its update from Quick. I was like, well, that's a hint. Like, it's probably Quick. So let's go to the next slide. So looking at the traffic in Wireshark, one thing you'll notice right away is like the protocol set Quick for a lot of this. Like you'll see this big blob down here, Quick, initial handshake, protected initial, a bunch of random fields. Some of these payloads are big, some are small, kind of all over the map. But then you've got all these little small ones over the top, like LEN 14, LEN 24. So are those actually Quick? Is that a VPN protocol? Is it something totally different? So that's what we're going to dig into today. Next slide. So the packet is pretty boring. It's like 24 bytes. There's not a whole lot in it. There's no identifiable strings. It doesn't really have any particular structure offhand. It doesn't really look like, if you look at a bunch of them together, the bytes change quite often. That 1803 in the very beginning of the packet stream almost looks like TLS negotiation. It's a little bit off, but that's one kind of possible hint. So maybe it's DTLS. So let's crowdsource it. And by crowdsource it, I mean throw it at the internet and see what comes back. So next slide.
I want to, before we go to the next slide, I want to point out that I appreciate how well you know your audience, that you blocked out the IP in the hex view as well. That
I probably missed it somewhere, but if you want to spend less time on it, go for it.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case.
Make it harder. So
exactly.
We're gonna hack the laziest way possible, which is go copy and then click paste and then click enter. And so it's essentially 2 total commands to bounce this packet that we received from a honeynet off the entire internet real quick. So we're going to install ZMAP. We're going to run against port 443, use the UDP module. We're going to send 100,000 packets per second. We're going to pass in probarbs hex, the entire hex stream we got from Wireshark. Output fields, you have to specify the data field, otherwise it doesn't spit it out by default because we actually want to see the hex encoded output. And then we run it a million times across random IPs on the internet, and we just say go pew pew, and that's it. So next slide. So about 10 seconds later, we have a giant list of all these different payloads coming back in. And one thing you'll notice right away is that all these payloads are random. Like these do not look like the same thing. So let's go look a little bit deeper. Let's go sort the entire set of results and figure out what that looks like. Next slide. So if we do a unique sort on the data, none of them match. Like every single packet is beautiful and unique like a snowflake. Like there's not a single one that matches the same bytes. And they don't even have similar patterns in them. Like, what the hell is this? You do have a couple packets jump out here with the big strings of zeros in them, but typically they're just kind of all over the map. And most of them are about fixed size, some are not fixed size. Like, this doesn't really make any sense. So next slide. So if we don't know what it is by looking at it at Wireshark, we can't figure it out based on the quick reply. Like, let's just crowdsource it even harder. Let's go port scan all the machines we got replies back from and figure out what they're running. Like what software, what package, what distribution, what OS. And of course, the very first thing comes back is, akamai-tech.com. It's like, dang it, these are just Akamai gateways. So these are super boring. Like it's something that Akamai supports, which is probably, pop the next slide real quick. Just Quick. So it's a different version of Quick. It's a slight modification of the packet that Wireshark did not detect. And there's some versions of Quick Probe, see Q9999, that's designed to get you a version unknown response. On the left side here, you see this gigantic scanning blob 1280 byte packet. That's also just Quick. Like it's just a different variant with a bunch of fields in it. If we dig through all the data pretty deep, we'll notice that we do get to pull out a DTLS VPN packet at some point, and that's also UDP 443. But that's pretty boring. Like that's not particularly exciting either. We didn't really learn much from this stuff. So next. So we did find this random packet that's MGL NDD and an IP address and then 443. And like maybe this is important. So if you search for this, the first thing you find is like the SANS Stormcast diary about someone saying, what the hell is this thing? Why is it all over the internet? And many, many years later, someone actually comes back and says, hey, I figured it out. They realize it's part of the Magellan Ripe Atlas tools. And it sends this payload not for any like reason that makes any sense at all in the protocol, but just because they want to send it for fun. It's a way that they just send some data over the socket. So it's absolutely useful. It's all sad. It wasn't helpful at all. So this is an example of like we only spent maybe 10 minutes on this whole process. So it's a really quick way to like, are there any unknowns in this protocol? What else responds to this port? Obviously, you don't want to do that if it's a payload, like an attack traffic, like Bree was saying. You don't want to go turn around and paste someone else's payload and repopulate Mariah across the internet. But if it's something where it looks like fairly innocuous and it's fairly small, you can use this kind of direct reflection method to immediately throw it against the entire internet. And then for anything that responds, go scan them and figure out what they are. And then hopefully you can narrow down what the protocol is. So we take this approach for all kinds of stuff. Next slide, please. So some win, some you lose. The process is lots of fun. But one thing that's pretty neat that a lot of folks don't realize is you can actually use runZero just like ZMAP. You can open up runZero, configure your scan, go to the Gen UDP probe on the probes and SDB tab, and just stick a random payload into whatever field you want, either base64, hex, or text, and then give it a long list of ports separated by commas, and it'll just throw that payload at whatever you want. So if you have a custom payload internally that you want to go tickle, or you've got a weird thing you're investigating internally, you can actually use the runZero scan engine directly for it, and it'll come back out as a normalized base64 blob in the results and the output of the runZero UI. So kind of a fun way to take unknown packets, discover them, and then use them directly in runZero for discovery. And that's it for this section.
There's a yeet DP joke there somewhere where you can just yeet packets out. But
Yeah.
I do love it. I do love it. There was I found it reminds me of I found on my home router, or a home router that I had. It was sending out at random intervals a single broadcast UDP packet with a base64 encoded string as the payload, and decoding it. It was, and I can't remember it, but even if I could, I wouldn't tell you because it's PII. But it was someone's name, like a human's name, and that person worked at major software vendor that made the router, and so that person was just broadcasting their name in base64 at random intervals across everybody's network. Why? I don't know. But and only one other person, I searched the internet for it, only one other person had ever noticed this. So
I ran across that before too. Yeah, I'm trying to remember what router it was. It wasn't it wasn't Asus. It was another brand though, but I remember what we were talking about.
Yep. Which I thought was funny. I was just like, what? Why is this happening?
It reminds me of the early days of Namco, where you would have the secret level that showed the developers' names.
Mm-hmm.
This person at the firewall company just really want to let
Yep.
you know who did the handiwork. I had not quite exactly that, but one of my first times just sniffing traffic at random, I found a whole bunch of IPv6 traffic that was at the time what seemed like random base64 strings.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out it was like my ISP doing next neighbor detection. They were trying to figure out who all had IPv6 enabled. Weird stuff.
It's 2024, and I don't think I actually have IPv6 on my home router from my ISP. It makes me sad.
I possibly. I have to double check with my new ISP because I moved. But my problem was that my network part on my laptop would overheat and freak out from handling IPv6 requests for some reason. So I had to actually turn it off on the kernel level and just pretend that I only have IPv4.
Wow, that's weird. Historically, we only see it on network kit where it's been trying to load IPv6 into certain tables like cam tables and whatnot, and just like failing because they weren't big enough. But that's messed up.
It's super weird.
Yeah, it's always hit or miss with your ISPs.
And speaking of cryptic deep dive protocol magic, Tom has some really, really cool stuff to discuss about probing Microsoft SQL Server via TLS. Tom, take it away.
Yeah, this is sort of interesting. It's really quick, and it also serves to illustrate like how getting feedback from our customers can be really impactful. So we have capability to discover SQL service instances, both through the browser service, which is sort of an advertisement service that Microsoft has to help folks discover their SQL services, as well as the directly talking to the SQL service endpoint. We have a specific probe for the browser port so that we can reach out and talk to them and collect its information that it wants to share about services. But we have a customer that was pointing out that they would like certain information, like the TLS certificates, to come back from the SQL Server instances. And whenever we add support for a protocol, we try to collect all the information we can. But sometimes either the protocol changes or we overlook a particular feature. And so there's room for improvement. So next slide, please. So in the case of SQL Server, just for some context, the protocol that SQL Server typically uses to communicate is called tabular data stream. Version 7 has been around for literally decades. A variety of products outside of SQL Server speak this protocol. It was actually invented, oh man, I've just forgotten the product, by other vendors, and it's been sort of a standard. But 7 is the OG protocol. It's been around for a while. And 8 was introduced here recently in November 2022 via SQL Server 22. And the difference between the two really gets down to how the encryption is handled. In TDS 7, the client can negotiate with the server what kind of encryption it wants to employ. And usually the client effectively advertises that it doesn't support encryption, it's required, or that it does support it, but it's on or off. Server responds the same way. But it's a negotiated thing. And if you do negotiate encryption, it'll do TLS inside the TDS packet. So unlike other sane protocols, even somewhat sane, even insane protocols, if they're going to implement TLS, they typically wrap the entire session with TLS, and then they talk within the tunnel. Or in the case of like SMTP and POP, they may start off in plain text, but they do start TLS, and then the entire communication is then wrapped in TLS. And so you've got the security that TLS provides for confidentiality and for identity, where you've got certificates involved, but all of your secret stuff is wrapped inside of that session. Well, TDS 7 did it differently. They're like, okay, we're going to do SSL inside of our TDS session. We're going to negotiate TDS. We're going to have that protocol header, and SSL is going to be inside of it, which is frustrating and annoying. But 8 changed things a little bit. With TDS 8, one, you can wrap the entire session in TLS, which does things more sanely, and it protects the entirety of the communications. And it means that before you start exchanging any kind of information, you've protected the data, and you've got potentially a strong assertion of identity on the other side via certificates. And then the second thing that's really impactful and meaningful here is that they introduced a new feature called strict, which means that instead of being able to negotiate the level of encryption you want, they can say, no, you have to wrap this in TLS. It's in strict mode. And if you're not talking to us via TLS, no dice, you get nothing, to quote Wonka. And so that's like the key difference is how do you handle encryption? And what's meaningful for us here is that the customers asked us to do a better job of collecting TLS certificates. But the other thing is that if we encounter SQL services that have strict mode on, they wouldn't look like your typical SQL Server instance. They would look like a they would look like a TLS endpoint, which you would then negotiate TLS with, and then you would have to know to communicate with SQL after that. You have to know what protocol you're getting, because this isn't one of those protocols that you communicate to and the server offers data first, which is always helpful when you're trying to fingerprint. It's one of those things where you communicate, you connect to it, and then as a client, you send your part of it, and then it responds. So that just added a little bit of challenge there. And so go to the next slide, please.
But before we go to the next slide, is it possible, and I don't know, this is me just being silly, but is it possible to negotiate the embedded SSL inside TDS inside a strict TDS connection so that you get double SSL?
No, it is not. That would be hilariously bad and not terribly surprising. Whenever you go into SQL Server and you configure the requirement for strict, it basically disables the negotiation for encryption. It ignores what you've said in the packet. And it disables the ability to basically to negotiate TDS 7 at all. And so you have to know, you have to have the TLS cert. But that would definitely be something that would not surprise me at all if it turned out you could do that thing or some variant thereof of nesting, and that it would also behave differently depending on the version as well. So you'd be able to figure out the version if it didn't already tell you anyway. So what you see on the screen is what we were pulling before. This is kind of information we were enumerating before, which is we would pull the version of SQL, and then we would turn that into a human readable major product version number like SQL Server 2022. and then the release info. What hotfix, what patch are you running? In this case, it's RTM. But like if you had upgraded SQL to another version, we'd be able to tell you which patch version you were running. So next slide, please. So with against SQL Server 2022 with TDS8, we can now pull the TLS certificate information. And that's great because people care about this information for a couple of different reasons. One, folks often want to know when their certificates are going to expire before they expire, so they can go do something about that to avoid breaking services. This information is not displayed here, but as part of the things we collect TLS not before and not after values that will tell you whether or not it's going to expire and when it's going to expire. Another piece of information that's useful here is the cipher names that we've negotiated. And that's great for customers who would like to, for those folks who would like to audit their environments to make sure that their encryption is up to a certain level because they're required to do so by agreement, by contract, by regulation, et cetera. And then the last thing that we often use pretty commonly is the value for CN, the common name that's in the certificate. We collect that information and we generally look for certain invalid values, but when they're not invalid, we use that as host name because in this particular case, it is very strongly correlated with the host name of the host. Or in the case of SQL, the cluster name, if it's a cluster, which is also a valid host name for this host. So in addition to providing the expected information, there's things we can sort of derive from that. And that's the thing we can do today for TDS 8, and it's a thing we'll be able to do in the next week or so for TDS 7.4. It's just a matter of slightly adjusting how we have to talk to the endpoint.
Question about this.
You got something? Yeah.
One of the fields is tls.fp.sha1. Is TDS 8 still using SHA-1, or have they fully moved over to SHA-256?
No, this is a fingerprint value that we calculate.
Okay.
We calculate the SHA-1 and SHA-256 thumbprints, and that allows you to use the tool of your choice to do correlation. So, if you want to look for the same certificate being used on multiple hosts, this just allows you to decide whether you want to use SHA-256 or SHA-1 to do that. If they're not necessarily going to be the case here, but on other services, if there are particular certificates that have been compromised, this allows you to quickly search across your environment and identify those compromised certificates and then go do some remediation.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah,
I mean, it's things that we see all the time, and sometimes it's easy to overlook the value of those things, but yeah, that's what that is. All right, next slide, please. And then while we were looking at it, it occurred to us that SQL Server does Windows authentication. Like it does Windows authentication by default when you install it, and you can't turn it off. You can do integrated authentication with like built-in SQL accounts in addition to Windows authentication, but you can't really turn off Windows authentication. And for anything that does Windows authentication, you can do pretty much NTLM authentication or Kerberos. But for NTLM auth, you can send a standard request and you can get back the computer name, the domain name, some timestamp information, and the version. And those are great for us because that means we can assert a host name, but also with the version string, we can turn that into the rough version of the operating system. In this case, it'd be Windows Server 2019. So that gives us a lot of information about the host, and it's something that we hadn't implemented yet. And we already have it for IAS and for RDP and for obviously for SMB, but this just gives us another vector for understanding the OS and then also its host name, so we can start correlating assets and providing that data for customers. So that was another thing that's like, while we're here, let's improve this overall. And so the outcome for this particular customer is a lot better visibility into their environment, both the operating system version, but also the SQL, the certificates, and then some information about how the encryption is configured. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. We have
fascinating.
It's so cool, and we do have a policy of trying to squeeze as much information as we can out of every probe, just because you never know what's going to end up being useful. And that was really fascinating. Thank you, Tom. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's particularly when all you can see from that particular endpoint is a single service. Sometimes that's all you get, and so you have to get everything you possibly can out of it.
Yep.
Yeah, in a previous job, I did vulnerability management as part of my job, and you would be amazed at the kinds of vulnerability information you can get just from running one running service and the NetBIOS name. It's fascinating.
And so now we're going to move on to just a real quick rapid response retrospective. So it's been another busy month with runZero Rapid Response, which for those of you who are new to it, this is where we can send out queries and blog posts to let you find devices on your network that may be security sensitive or under active attack or have interesting vulnerabilities announced for them. And so this was these were some interesting ones. There's one here. You can see the CVSS score of 9.8, which is the Westermo EDW devices, and these were Tom. I think you helped me with this one, right? This was hard coded credentials.
Yeah, there were two vulnerabilities here. They were both rated 9.8. One of them was hard coded credentials that was trivially discovered in the firmware by using strings. And they were not particularly hard to, they were not difficult credentials. You could potentially were you able to capture the hash or just brute force it or just use the model name. You could discover these particular credentials. And the second one was an unauthenticated GET request that allow you to pull a config file that would also potentially contain other sensitive information such as username, config details, and password that were in clear text. And if I recall correctly, their response was like, hey, upgrade to a different device.
Yep. Which is always exciting. And then there was the checkpoint vulnerability. That was interesting in that was an information disclosure as well, and it lets you get some pretty sensitive info exfiltrated, right? Yeah,
that was in the theme of this last couple of months. That was directory traversal using .. if I recall correctly, multiple directories there. And like initially the write-ups on it indicated that, yeah, you could go get the password file and you could grab creds that could potentially be used both on the device, but also laterally. Like you may be able to get accounts that have access to LDAP credentials, which you could then, if they're privileged, use them to go laterally into Active Directory and wreak chaos. Other folks later discovered that one, and the exploit was relatively trivial, and two, you could collect other things that may be of interest on the device. So if you have TLS certificates, you could get the private keys, you could get SSH search, you could just get, if you knew the location of certain files, you could just go collect them, which can be dangerous both for machine in the middle, but also for lateral movement. So that was pretty gnarly and nasty bug. It didn't allow you to, I don't recall that it allowed you to do any kind of RCE, but it certainly allowed you to leverage that access to collect information and potentially move laterally, which is really, really dangerous.
The write-ups for that vulnerability are harrowing. It really is. You send one request and whoops, here's all the LDAP information. We've started looking a lot at Checkpoint in the past little bit, in part because of that.
Harrowing is not a word you want to hear when you're talking about security vulnerability write-ups. That's yeah. And this ties into, we've noticed a large trend that we talked about in our research report of attacks against these border and gateway devices that we've seen a big uptick in that. And we're approaching time, so let's get one more in here. I think we had I'll open it up to the panel. Which one should we discuss?
I like the Citrix NetScaler one. You may have seen in the Q&A, Ron mentioned the fact that it involves running code right off the stack. It's very retro.
Very. There's a joke there for retro. There's got to be something with a return there. It's just not quite coming to me. But yes, pop retro, something like that. There we go.
Yes.
Now I feel old. I'm revealing my age there. So. And then I wanted to save a little bit of time because I wanted to talk about how if you haven't gotten enough of listening to me and HD talk, you can come see us talk at Hacker Summer Camp. We're going to be at Black Hat and DEF CON, both. And HD, do you want to give the elevator pitch?
Sure. The short version is when the XEutils bug came out, we said, hey, it'd be fun. Let's go take the public key for the persona known as Giatan and then try to authenticate with it across the whole internet in like an hour. So we try to find every other machine on the internet that would accept their key for authentication to hopefully find their home servers. And while we didn't find that, we made lots of friends and found thousands of shells along the way. So this is going to be a talk about all the other stuff we found. And we built a neat auditing toolkit that'll let you do terrible things to SSH.
Would you say that the real Geotan was the botnet you made along the way?
Like, that's
Sorry, that was hilarious. All right, and that's we are at time. I want to thank you all so much for coming. Brianna, thank you so much for being our special guest. That was
Thank you so much
really
for having
fascinating.
me. This was great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yep. Wonderful. And everyone, please feel free to register for next month's runZero Hour and come see us in Las Vegas this summer if you're going to be out there. And until then, we'll see you next month.
thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.